now retired, voluntarily unemployed. And I joined the Audio Engineering Society in the mid-'80s, I would guess probably 1984, at a time when I was at the National Research Council in Ottawa, a research scientist. And I had kind of, a few years before that, made the decision to focus on what I broadly called sound reproduction. It wasn't what I intended as a life's career. I stumbled into it. I was doing psychoacoustics research, and for that research I needed loudspeakers, and discovered, to my unpleasant surprise, that at the time, in the late 60s and early 70s when I started this, that loudspeakers were pretty bad, in spite of all the assertions that we had achieved high goals of performance. But when you get down to measuring their performance and looking at what they were doing compared to what they really should be doing as accurate transducers, they just didn't meet muster. I just wrote a book, and it's a major part of a theme that runs throughout the book, and that is the frustration that we have at the moment as I describe it, there is more useful information on the side of a tire than there is in a loudspeaker specification sheet, because at least the data on the side of a tire is absolutely standardized, in fact internationally standardized to a substantial extent, and it tells you how fast you can drive with that tire, how much air you put in it, and whether it'll fit your vehicle. You get really nothing quite so useful out of most loudspeaker specification sheets, and it's not as though we can't do it. We can do it. It's just that the reality is, at the moment, not many manufacturers have those facilities. They can't generate that data on their own products. Of course, this explains why there is such a wide range in sound quality among loudspeakers, because some of them are much more competently designed than others. That's just a simple fact. And part of that competence is the ability on the part of the engineers to see in technical data accurately and comprehensively how their products are actually working. And with only partial data, as most of them have, they can't possibly produce a fully developed result. In the beginning, as I say, we tried to look at what can we hear, and from that, what can we infer about what loudspeakers need to radiate into the room. I mean, we're trying to design the loudspeaker based on what we hear. And it turns out that from the analysis of these two domains, the technical data on the one side and the subjective data on the other side, we began to see correlations, to be able to recognize patterns in the technical data that correlated with patterns on the subjective side. Speakers that sounded good all exhibited certain kinds of measured characteristics. That's a step forward. And in the process, while I was at the National Research Council for all those years, we gradually began to dissect the small parts of the perceptual process and try to identify, if we're going to measure a frequency response curve that goes from low frequencies up to high frequencies, what kind of deviations can we hear? I mean, how much of a variation in this frequency response curve can we get away with and not be audible before people start saying, oh, I begin to hear something, and what I hear I don't like. And so we identified thresholds of detection for various aspects of measured characteristics. And I guess really the high point came when Sean Olive, who worked for me at Harman International, and I sat down one day and thought, well, let's just see if we can close the loop, to take a package of technical measured data, numbers and graphs, and from those numbers and graphs calculate a predicted sound quality, a figure of merit, just from the technical data. On the same loudspeakers that we do this for, we do the double-blind listening evaluation. So we end up with a collection of subjective data, the numbers on a scale of 10, where people simply listen to music and say, that sounds like about an 8 to me, or a 6 or a 5 or whatever for that particular piece of music and that particular loudspeaker. And then we have our predictions. And the correlation in the end between the prediction and the subjective evaluation was 0.86. for all loudspeakers, for 70 loudspeakers that we tested of all sizes, from big floor-standing, expensive jobbies down to little bookshelf speakers you could tuck under your arm. That's impressive. But that includes quite a range of qualities, speakers that have a lot of bass to speakers that have no bass, the little ones. And so just to put a finer point on it, when we isolated a set of 13 small bookshelf loudspeakers that had similar bandwidth, similar lack of bass, if you like, the correlation was 0.996. It was 1. There were no discrepancies between the predicted number calculated from anechoic data, technical data, and the subjective ratings that listeners gave us. So that's the high point, because that means the loop is closed. There are very few mysteries left. The remaining problem is the room, because what I've just described to you is basically true for frequencies above about 200 hertz. Below 200 hertz, we're in the bass region. Rooms have their strong individualistic personalities, and we needed to solve that one. And so the last several years I was at Harman International, I and the group tackled that one, and Todd Welty was one of the major contributors to the solution of that, where we actually developed multiple subwoofer arrangements of multiple subwoofers in rooms with or without signal processing that could actually deliver amazingly predictable and good bass to several listeners in different rooms. I mean, the bass variability is essentially substantially not a major factor anymore. So now my fantasy, the next frontier, is to try to do what I can to see that this excellence of performance exists in products that people can buy, and that it's done on both sides of our audio industry, on the professional side where the art is created, and on the consumer side where the art is appreciated, so that for the first time in our industry, perhaps, there's a high probability that a customer, when they press a play button, might hear the art as it was created, which is not the case at the moment, because the artists, the recording studios themselves are not standardized. They're hugely variable, and therefore the recordings are hugely variable. And so if the recording is a variable factor in the art, in the whole artistic delivery process, then there's little hope that a customer, however much he or she might spend and however much time and care they put on to fine-tuning, tweaking their playback system, there's still a very high probability that what they hear will not be what was intended. And that's unacceptable. So I guess my thrust of the moment was the subject of my Heiser lecture at the AES in San Francisco a few weeks back, and it is basically that we want to close the other loop, to close the professional consumer loop, so that what professionals create is appreciated by consumers.